Okay.
On my end, it kind of looks like you already started.
Well, I'm streaming. Now, I was streaming. I wasn't recording. There's the difference.
Fair enough.
Okay, so we are currently streaming Age of Empires 2 because Wakfu needed a full update, and I don't have time for that right now. How do I get back to my,
Thrilling gameplay, everyone.
thrilling gameplay. I almost said gameplay.
Well, in this case, it's not that far off.
Alright. Ooh, co-op campaigns. One day I'll get people to play this game with me. Let's see.
One day. Today's not that day.
I can guess I can do a skirmish. Let's see. Oh, this is just cheating. How is this not a locked case? I got a character. Where are... Ah, here they are. So anyway, so we are here today to talk about a couple things. Chief among them is the current writing project that I have. Hold on. Oh, that's how I get back to the channel. Interesting. So chief among them is the writing project I am currently involved with, which I finally have an editor for. So I'm currently going back and redoing all the currently released chapters because I finally have an editor. What can I say, right? So we talked a little bit about, me and Doctor talked a little bit about some of the stuff we were going to talk about, but it's probably going to be a little bit of a disorganized stream. I guess what would you suggest the first thing we talk about? I would imagine it would be the project's name, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a good starting point when compared to everything else.
Right. Instead of the purpose, let's just give the fucking name, eh? So
yeah,
the name of the project is Divine Will, and the name will make sense as we talk about it. But it is meant to be. Hold on, where's the? Here we go. So Divine Will is meant to be a web novel that is a love letter basically to heroic fiction. So you're gonna find elements of manhwa, manga, and American comics in there, as well as the occasional nod, because it's mostly a nod to visual media. But you will find nods to things like novels and all that stuff in there as well. I guess we can do the Berbers too. Let's see. So, as I said, it's basically a love letter to mostly American and Japanese fiction, because that's the stuff I have the most experience with. Let's see, we'll go with Mongols. So the way it's structured, currently speaking, okay. Before we go with that, I guess we could give a summary of the story.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, might as well let everyone know what the story's about.
Okay, so I just pulled it up here. So the introductory tagline on Pixiv reads, "The author has issued their final test. All fiction has become real in a violently changing world. Now Will, Eldon, and Momo must work together without ever meeting each other to master eldritch powers, cultivate the four loves, and amass champions from across the galaxy to save creation from an invincible anti-god." So, as you might have guessed from the way it's structured, that beginning, it's 3 stories told in parallel to each other that affect each other, but they don't fully cross over. So, I took a lot of inspiration from things like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and the general structure of DC and classic Marvel comics back when they both used to be good. So, guess we can go Vietnamese.
Everything used to be good till the Fire Nation struck.
Right. Actually, where's the J? We'll go with K. So, yeah, that's good. So I guess we could just start the game. So I guess what would you think we should talk about first? Since you're the one with you know this project actually quite well so far. So what would you, if you were gonna pose this to someone, what would be the first thing that you would suggest for someone to know about it?
Well, like with just about everything, kind of how it starts.
Okay, so
Like,
go on.
Gone, you were about to say
No,
something?
I
I was about to say. Yeah, as the one person in here can tell, we're not really good at communicating.
Well, it's more along the lines of like it's easier to communicate when you're face to face. It's not necessarily as easy to do so when you're not doing it face to face because I can't see when you're about to speak. I just noticed
That's
this guy's
true.
name is Smoking Squirrel, and I find that hysterical.
Wait, what?
The guy out here, his name is Smoking Squirrel, the Mayan chieftain. Anyway, so as you were saying, what would you suggest we start with, considering that you're the one furthest removed from the project?
Again, like I said, like probably the best place to start is at the beginnings. Like, give them a quick summary on how you plan on having the story begin, and introducing the characters, all that jazz.
Well, luckily enough, I actually tell you exactly what the story is about in the first goddamn sentence. So,
Hey, proving my point.
so the goal of the entire story is summed up in the first sentence, which reads. So I'm just gonna read the first sentence. My name is Sure Will Be a Truman, and this is my story about the Age of Heroes, from first rising to final farewell. A story replete with horror and tragedy, fluctuating between science fiction and fantasy, punctuating continual metamorphosis and rebellion against grimdark. So, as you might guess, from first rising to final farewell, we're gonna tell the story of this character from we have a scout attack. Anyway, I should have been doing that myself. Anyway, so I keep forgetting I can just auto scout. Anyway, so back to the story. So the goal is to tell the story of Will Truman. And yes, her name is obviously a pun. Her name is literally She Will Be a Truman. It's obviously a pun. But I'll get to the name in a moment because the name is actually quite meaningful. Outside of the fact it's a really dumb pun. But it's to tell her story as a magical girl or a superhero, whichever one you would prefer, because she's technically both. Tell her story from the beginning all the way until her martyrdom, because the goal, the end of the story, and this isn't exactly a secret, I heavily foreshadowed this within the first 15 chapters, she is going to die. And so the whole thing is about, how does she, come to meet her, her death, and is it a good death, or does she have the luxury of having a good death? So, oops, that is the wrong character. So, that's the goal, but the three different stories that are being told are slightly different. So the first story is about Will herself, who the story is named after. It's literally called Divine Will. So it's like the second story, which I'm currently in the process of revising because I have an editor now. So yeah, I'll explain this part, and then I'll explain why it's so important to have an editor, because this has been intensely frustrating. The second story is about a young. It's about a young, and don't freak out when I say this, because there's really no better way to explain this. It's about a young Futanari woman who is a super robot pilot. Now the goal with this was to take something from each of these genres and place them into a different setting that's usually not the focal point. So the idea with hers was, all right, we'll take this particular biology, because the biology part here is actually really interesting. What does it mean, for example, to be, in a sense, fully participating in both the male and the female natures? Because they're not the same. They're complementary opposites. So what would it mean to, exist in this state? And so the idea was, okay, so we'll put this in a military science fiction setting, as this is one of the recruits. This is not a common thing for the character. She's literally a one in a kind. So, but we'll explain how that works later. We meet a lot of characters in her story because Will herself is not particularly familiar with a lot of the things that are going on yet. Eldin is, because she was raised in a setting that made her familiar with much of what is going on in the early bit of the story. So, how would you say we did with the explanation there? Do you think I should focus a little bit on something more, or do you think we should just move on to the third story?
So it sounded like a quick wiki summary. I'll be honest.
Okay. So,
you looked at.
So is there something that you think I should expand upon, at least with Will or Eldon's story? Because Will's story is pretty simply, bad things have just happened, and okay. So Will's story begins with her performing her first act of vigilantism, which is basically to stop a police pursuit. It's not exactly high stakes. The day after that happens, we have a kaiju attack in Japan, the first kaiju attack in history within the story. And she's not fighting the monster, because she doesn't live in Japan. She goes to Japan as basically a humanitarian aid volunteer to help fish people out of the rubble. Because no one in the overworld, the majority of the world, knows what the hell is going on. We learn more about what's going on in Eldon's story. And that's basically where Will's story begins, is she does have these fantastical powers, but she didn't know anyone else did. And she's with the rest of us, coming to learn what has been hidden in the background of the world so far within the story. Is that a better summary?
Yep.
Okay.
So, but I did notice a very important part of the summary that you did kind of gloss over, and that is the personality of the main character.
Well, I'm just talking about the story right now. We can get to the characters, or if you think it's important to talk about the character itself, I can do that. So Will is herself a very outgoing and very light-hearted tomboy. Like, she's meant to be a girl with a very sweet disposition who just happens to have an affinity for physical activity. She's not one of those, she's not a Captain Marvel type character where it's like, I can do everything else the boys can do, and I watch as I, make an ass of myself by stealing a bike from someone who is just being a bit uncouth. It's not the feminist fantasy of, I can do whatever the hell I want, and, there should be no consequences. I need to build more houses. Rather, the idea with Will is that she's supposed to be more of a classic comic book style tomboy. Sweet, good-natured, does not hate men, in any way, shape, or form. She's just someone who is capable of running with the boys because of the particular skills she has at hand. It doesn't even necessarily mean that she is just as strong as the male characters. Now, you read the story and you'll realize she is extremely strong. But it's, as said in the, tagline, the goal here is to get these three female characters to effectively be the heart that helps to draw in the masculine and the feminine heroic element and draw it out into the open. And that's where we will get the Marvel, DC and Invincible style world. Is that it has to be drawn out because there's background context to explain why it hasn't happened yet. Is that better?
Yes, actually it is.
Okay. So, another thing is Will. This is not mentioned early in the story. This is mentioned in the third story, introduction. But the story takes place in 2075. there's a lot of things that are just not mentioned because, like, in context, because it's just not relevant. Like, the context here is that there are different, how would you say, movements within all these different countries around the world. So some people have removed AI from, for example, the houses for a number of reasons. Some people more embrace AI. There was never a lot of things that you assume would happen in this world. So, for example, we never actually pass the Loveless test of AI. Because it turns out, in the story at least, and the thing is, I do have a metaphysical structure that restrains how the story is told for the story. I guess this will be not really a spoiler. It's going to be pretty obvious in the second story when I mention it. The only thing that can actually have consciousness in the story is something that's alive. So it can, a transistor-based computer cannot facilitate consciousness for the sole fact that, transistor-based computers aren't alive in any way, shape, or form. They are just a facsimile of life.
Shocker, I know.
Right? So they have no soul. ChatGPT just turns out to be a bunch of switches, performing math problems. But there are AI in the story. The thing is that all the AI are wetware machines. They're literal neurons that have been engineered for the purpose of being a loveless machine. So they actually are alive. So that's the difference. I might wander out into different tangents as this goes on. As you might be able to tell, I have a tendency to, ramble when I'm talking.
That was kind of the case with our last few streams, where it's like we were on one type of target for an idea for quite a while, and then suddenly we shifted to another one because we don't really stay consistent with our topics.
Well, yeah, it's like, to be fair, we are new at this. So anyway, do you think that that's a consistent, do you think I should get into Will's father by any chance?
At the moment, I don't see why they really need to know about him yet. So it'll probably be best for them to find that out by reading.
Okay.
Again, right now you're only focusing on the story and the main characters.
Okay. So those. Okay. So that would be the core central, that is the wrong building. That would be the core character who we're focusing on in Will's story. The second story is Eldon, as we already talked about. She is a girl, or a Futanari, whichever one you want to use the word of. I mean, technically either one is correct. Well, I guess technically one of them is correct and the other one's not. It's just we don't really have a word in English for it, because even in the story, I mentioned that her condition is not comparable to being intersex. Like, intersex, if you've ever studied medicine, is a bit of a tangent, I know, but it's not the thing people say. It's not a blurring of the boundaries of, male and female. All it is it's literally just a hormone or a developmental disorder. Like, the people who have this are still very clearly either male or female. It's just that their bodies have undergone some kind of maldevelopment, which has, resulted in a loss of function almost all the time. So hers is unique in that her intersexuality has not lost in not resulted in malfunction or a loss of function, and in fact it has resulted in a gain of function. And that is going to be used as a tool to highlight how it is that her condition is fundamentally different than, oh, that's a tiger, is fundamentally different than, anything else. Because it's not comparable to anything in reality, and that's kind of the point. So with Eldon's story, obviously, as we said, she's in a military context because she is a member of something called the GSSDO, which I guess... Well, here's a question. If you had to compare the GSSDO to anything, what would you compare it to? Because if you had to ask me, I would probably compare it to something along the lines of maybe SHIELD or Nerve. Do you think that's an apt comparison?
Yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, so
I would probably say Yeah, I would probably say, hey, while most of the characters that you are going to be focusing on the story lean more towards Shield, I'm going to have to say that the aspect of the GSSDO leans more heavily towards
Cadmus.
Nerve.
Oh,
Yeah.
you say Nerve? I mean, yeah. To be fair, Evangelion and DC Comics do have a heavy bit of inspiration, and I don't exactly try to hide it. It is very clear that a lot of the, what would you say, inspiration comes from things like Evangelion and Sailor Moon and all that stuff. I'm not exactly intending to be subtle about it because I'm not ashamed of it. I do like I love these stories. Why the hell would I not want to introduce this material into the story, right? So the first 15.
And I don't really see a reason. I don't really see a reason to be ashamed of it. I mean, look at The Simpsons, one of the most popular and biggest named brands on the world that hasn't actually been damaged. Their inspiration was the Flintstones, who they themselves openly admit that their inspiration was the Honeymooners.
Right. I mean, it's not like that was hard to figure out. But
Yeah.
Okay, that's another scout. Anyway, so where were we? We were talking about Elden's story, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Elden's goal, and if this sounds like Evangelion, it's not exactly, again, a secret that this is heavily alluding to Evangelion. It'll lead somewhere totally different, but yes, the idea does come from there. Elden is a pilot of a kaiju, which is humanoid, and in order to pilot it, it has to be restrained and effectively not necessarily lobotomized, but it does have to be carefully, what would you say, cyberized, kind of like Ghost in the Shell. So
yeah,
it's a cyborg, and she's a cyborg pilot basically. So if that sounds like Evangelion, yeah, that's because it basically is, the idea is ripped straight from Evangelion. It is placed in a different context, and there's a different metaphysical worldview applied onto it, which is going to make the story turn out wildly different. Because a large part of the mistakes, and I think we talked about this earlier, but part of the goal of Divine Will is to take a lot of the assumptions of these stories and then flip them on their head. But not in a pretentious way. To just point out, it's like, no, there literally is something you just haven't thought about when you were writing these stories, and it would fundamentally change how these stories operate. So, is there anything you think I should talk about? Do you think we should talk about the alien salvaging operations?
I don't really see how that relates to basically relates to what we're talking about.
Because the reason
because
the reason I'm asking is because, as you know, that's a large part of Mal Lin's story, and that's a large sidebar within Elden's story. It's a subplot that it will eventually lead somewhere. So, actually, we will talk about that later. But the reason I brought that up is because, remember, it was the thing we were talking about changing and modifying the cosmology you find in comic books into, something. It's not really deconstructing as much as reconstructing the cosmology within comic books, because we were talking about comics from, and if you were to visit DC or Marvel as an anthropologist, how would you consider Kryptonians versus Eternals? Not like a fight, but like as species. So yeah, we'll get back to that, but the origin of the GSSDO. Do you think that should be brought up?
Again, it's like right now at the moment we should only be focusing on the actual parts that connect to the actual main story heavily. The information on the origin of the GSSDO sounds like something that really should be given, the readers themselves should look up and see about.
I mean, that's fair. Let's see. So, excuse me. So, do you want to just move on to Momo's story?
Sure.
Okay. So, Momo's story is about a girl who is not a human being. She is, in fact, a fairy. Now, this is important because when you think fairy, you might think Tinkerbell. I'm using it more in a Celtic way to refer to just a magical intelligence with a body. So we're not talking about angels here. We're not talking humans here. It is actually different. Like, I guess you could say, like, if you were to look at Inuyasha, all the yokai would be classified as fairies within this context. So that would be so that's just a little bit of context there. Momo is the daughter of two fairies, obviously. Her mother is her mother is half Jinn and half Oni. But her father is half incubus and half vampire. And the reason that this is important is because when you take all three of these characters into consideration, you'll see that they interplay with eldritch powers differently from each other. So, what Momo's occupation is, just like Will is just a student who happens to be a magical girl on the side, and Eldon is a full-time super robot pilot, or, cyborg pilot, Momo is effectively a monster hunter. She's officially called the Demon Slayer, and yes, I use the Inuyasha term in the Japanese translation, but she is she is a demon slayer. She goes out and she hunts monsters to protect human beings. And the reason why is because she was raised by two kind-hearted human parents. Sound a little bit like Superman? It's kind of, yeah, that's exactly where I got the idea. Again, I'm not shy about this. So, I guess that would be the context there. She is from the start, she's quite powerful because, again, she has genie, vampire, oni, and incubus, powers. So she has quite the skill set. Doesn't necessarily mean that she's entirely OP. The first encounter she has with a metahuman, she gets absolutely fucking bodied. But she is very good at fighting other fairies. Now, the reason I brought that up is because the idea is that all three of these characters are dutiful in their nature. They believe in something beyond themselves, even though in each case it is different. Like Will is a hardline Catholic, Eldon's a Buddhist, and Momo tends more towards naturalism. So I guess that would be closer to Taoism once you put magic involved in there. And they interplay with eldritch powers very differently from each other. So Will transforms into an eldritch power. She takes on an eldritch nature in order to fight eldritch powers and serve the good. Eldon, on the other hand, has to, in a sense, cooperate with an eldritch power. The kaiju that she has to pilot in order to protect mankind from eldritch powers. And then Momo is an eldritch power who has to learn how to be human in order to protect human beings from eldritch powers. So there is a bit of a interplay between these characters and their very natures and how their powers have affected them. So, as you can tell, this is probably practice for a shorter video where we basically advertise this project, eh?
Indeed.
So, what else? Do you think that that's sufficient introduction for the three stories?
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you, again, being more removed from the story than I am, because I don't mind talking about any of this stuff, what would you suggest we talk about next regarding it?
Well, you said that the big part of the story is how the getting these three together. So, after knowing that, the next question, again, as someone who's far from removed, is what is your plan to bring these three together? Like, what is your general idea on that?
So, the story was actually inspired in part by the 7 Soldiers of Victory by Grant Morrison, which revolves around 7 superheroes who have to cooperate with each other, but they don't know that they're working together, and they don't meet each other. So the whole idea is that there's some causal power. We don't know what it is yet, but there is some causal power that is directing the story in such a way that they have to cooperate on the same goals in order to achieve that end. So this story will dive quite a bit into things specifically like metaphysics, because we have to ask the question, like, what the hell is superpowers in this context? You know, it's kind of important. If it turns out your powers, for example, come from the devil, then maybe it's not a good idea to use them. I'm sorry. But on the other hand, like, if these powers are just seminal powers that just belong to you, then, you know, there's still moral weight behind them, and it's still, you know, it's still important to understand what they are so you can most effectively use them. So a large part of the story will be investigating what things in this world actually are. Like, for example, if you meet someone who can seemingly manipulate time, are they actually manipulating time, or are they doing something else that simulates that effect? You know, and that's kind of an important thing, because it's about refocusing your sight on reality instead of appearances. And
going off on a small tangent, it's like My Hero Academia actually kind of showed a perfect example of this, like near the beginning of the tournament arc, where All Might was explaining on how basically what a quirk is listed as can be changed over an understanding on a new understanding on how it does. Like, the example that they gave in it is a girl with the ability to shoot water out of her finger, but is the original idea of what the quirk ability is. But then later on, they learned that she's not doing that. She's concentrating the moisture in the air into her finger, and that's how she's shooting water.
That's a good example. And there is a thing like that does happen within the story that's planned out. So, okay, so a little bit about the structure of the story, I guess, right? So the story structure is, again, modeled a little bit off of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. The idea being that we tell the story, we let the characters tell their story, and then when that's done, we can move on to someone else, maybe that we've already met within, one of these character stories, and we can continue it that way. Which could also potentially give me a break from a character if I, for some reason do not know what to do with them. I can give them a break and then come back to them later. So a lot of the structure of the story is designed after pulp fiction, because that's what comic books are. It's pulp fiction, and that's what most web novels are. They are not necessarily designed with a complete end goal in mind. Now, all I have to do to reach the end goal of Divine Will is I just have to let Will die. Because her story ends when she dies. Who would have guessed, right?
I mean, it's the most simplest explanation. In fact, the fact that you put it at the beginning of the story, that's like, this is a story of how leading to her death. Like, it could be anything. Like, yeah, it's like a lackluster end of her basically being randomly shot to death by a random dog on the street would be lackluster, but it's like it's still sticking true to what you promised at the beginning.
Yeah, well, I hope to not be that tacky. But
I just gave it as an example.
Well, where was I going with this? Shit, I forgot. I lost my train of thought. Anyway,
how this is basically like Pulp Fiction.
Oh yeah. Like, again, Starman, for example. There's nothing that stops a hero's story from ending with the death of the hero, and in fact, like, that's the classic way a lot of stories end. The American superheroes, for example, draw heavily from the traditions of heroism, of Beowulf. And guess how Beowulf ends?
He dies.
I hate to break it to you, he fucking dies. Granted, he goes out like an absolute fucking baller, but he still dies.
Spoiler warning, so basically one of the oldest stories known to man.
There's spoilers for the oldest fucking English novel ever. Okay, so there is an end to the story, and it's, again, Will dies. It's not so important that she dies as much as how she will die and what has led up to there. And the reason why is because
it's kind of like the hero's journey, but so in this case, it's a hero's death.
Well, no, it's again the classic version of. Okay, so technically, there are more ways to tell a story than the hero's journey. Hold on.
I was using it as an example.
Yeah.
Whereas like you're taking like the basic similar structure, but you're doing it differently. That's what I was basically going with.
Yeah. The story I have is not the hero structure in any way, shape, or form. It is actually quite different than that. I mean, I guess technically, if you wanted to torture the hero's journey and the story that I'm trying to write, you could then say, see, it's the hero's journey, but you would have to be quite dishonest in order to do that. But historically speaking, there have been people dishonest enough to torture a story into being something that it actually is not. So, so we were talking about, what were we talking about? Were we talking about the purposes of the story or the structure of the story?
Purposes, I believe.
Actually, I think we were talking about the structure, because we were talking about like how we end the story in the first place. But yeah, so the whole idea is just the story will be told, things will happen, we'll learn quite a bit, we will meet new characters. I have a lot of villains already set up within the story. And as Doctor can say, some of these villains are fucking evil, but they're evil in a very human, in a very human way. Like, I'll give you one example.
He kicked the baby.
He kicked the baby. not quite that. I guess I can give one example. So, in Eldon's story, we set up, and Momo's story, we set up a number of villains that we will eventually meet right off the bat, because they happen to deal specifically with the backstory of side characters. So, and one of those is an alien king. As I told you later, we will talk about the fact that there are aliens in the story. Is an alien king from a planet where everyone has access to magic. And that king, in order to become a king, he has to involve himself in a savage rite of initiation that is modeled after the Indo-European horse sacrifice ritual. And if you know anything about that, you can already tell this is a very evil man. But you know, it's a whole society that has gone mad in that particular situation. So, and again, like the backstory to another side character, Miss Breedlove, is a serial rapist. We don't know who he is. We don't know who he is. Otherwise, we would know his fucking name, and he wouldn't still be a serial rapist. But it's a really mundane evil. It's something you could see in the regular world, and it's just something that happens in one of the character backstories. So a number of the characters are a banal, more mundane. I don't want to say mundane as in like insignificant, but like mundane as in like literally within the world of man kind of evil. So I guess there's that. So, and the idea for this was that, as mentioned in the first sentence, that we move between like horror and awe for the in the story for the purpose of illustrating the reality of evil. Because there's a lot of people, especially nowadays, who think that evil, that there's no such thing as evil, but they say it because they don't think there's anything like good, which I find really, really bizarre. Because I'm like, look, man, it's not going to be that hard for me to convince you that evil exists. Like, at all. All I have to do is open up a history textbook. It's like, yes, let me thumb through the history of the Akkadians and what they did to the people who resisted their conquest. And most people will be like, yeah, maybe gang raping people and then putting the head of the victim on a pike outside of a city and like burning the entire city to the ground just because they didn't give you tribute is not a moral thing to do. Maybe that actually is evil. It's not that hard to see that. You have to be some Vosh type pseudo-intellectual to struggle to understand that evil is real. But the importance of that is I think evil can be used to highlight good. So the idea being that we use the intense evil of the villains and the people who just sit around and let evil happen as a tool to highlight the virtue and the struggle of the heroes.
I'm going to jump in with a small tangent here. Like, for me, I don't actually see too many people having issues seeing that there's evil in the world.
I've had a lot of
conversations. I don't really see.
Okay, go on.
I don't. But the one thing I do see more often is that people equating to small actions that they don't really benefit or that they don't like, and equating that to basically the worst of the worst. Like with your spike head, putting people's heads on spikes, the example that you gave earlier. I have actually seen people who take
They're
someone
just isolated
who
gamer moments. What can I say? Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. But yeah, it's like I've seen people take the most simplest of things, like not holding a door open for them and equating them to basically spy kids.
To Spy Kids?
I said spike heads.
Oh, spike heads. Okay,
Putting the heads on a spike.
That makes way more sense. But I mean, yeah,
spike heads is confirmed evil now.
Yeah, I guess there's two different extremes to that. The people who see evil where it's not, and then there's the people who refuse to see evil where it's at. But anyway, as we were talking, one of my, because we were talking about like the fact that earlier we were talking about the fact that some of these things that we're making this in response to, it's not that they don't have genuine points to make, but it's that their point completely lacks the context of the reality that we all live in. The reality that we all live in is that good exists. It's not that hard to show that good exists. Once you show that there's an objective standard which you are not to do, you understand that there's at least a prohibitive standard of what, to not do. There is some moral standard you can be held to, even if it's just prohibitive. I think you can show that there is a moral standard that is obligative, not just, prohibitive, but we'll get into that as the story goes, because the goal being we will eventually expand upon that. One of the groups that I had spent way too much time not paying attention to is Iconic Comics, and when I started reading their stuff, I'm like, this is the stuff that I would like to. Granted, a lot gorier and a lot darker in many cases, but this is the kind of story I would like to write. Is something heartfelt and earnest. Because that's the thing. Yeah. Like, I find it weird how you can have a lot of these stories nowadays, and these characters that you have in the story will go through these things that should make you stop and pause and think about the deeper things in life, and then they just don't. And it's like, no. Oftentimes when you come close to death, you start thinking to yourself, what the hell am I doing with my life? What is the meaning, value, or purpose of my life? Now sometimes you only realize that your life has the value when you're doing something really stupid. But still, when your life comes into danger, you think about the big things. And that was kind of the thing. It's like, okay, if these people are constantly in danger, constantly at the forefront of like saving people's lives, what in God, why wouldn't they think about these things? And so a large part of the story is going to, not a large part, but a significant part of the story is going to be devoted to examining the metaphysics of the characters. Because, again, as we mentioned, they're not all the same religion, but they're all thinking about things like, is there a soul? Do I have an afterlife? Is there a God? How do I, escape the situation I'm in, even if it's not in a metaphysical sense? So, those are interesting questions. They're just questions I don't see adequately explored in a lot of media. So I was like, you know what? I'll do it. I'll take a shot at it.
I mean, might as well.
Right? And we have our first metaphysical conversation in Momo's story when we have two fairies arguing with each other about whether or not God exists. Which I just thought it would be funny to have a troll be Catholic. Because if you know anything about medieval fairy tales, in some medieval fairy tales, you'll have a troll, which is objectively just a nature spirit from old paganism, and then they'll just be Catholic and and go to Catholic mass, and it's like, what a strange idea. This is perfect for a comic book because it's weird and wonky. It's like, it's perfect for a web novel because it's fucking weird. So it's not like there isn't real thought put into this. I've put a ridiculous amount of thought into trying to make everything fit together. So yeah, it's like just like in common America, where you'll just see oftentimes there's just elements that these people do, and it informs you about how they see the world, even if it doesn't bash you over the head with it. Like, for example, and I'm just gonna gush about how they do this in fucking iconic comics. Did you know in Common America's house, in Carly Vander's house, did you know that the saint in the background on her wall, that's an icon of the saint for, patron saint of rabbits?
Really?
Yeah. All right. Interesting.
That's cool.
Incidentally, it has nothing to fucking do with her particular story, but it does tell you a little bit about her. It's like, I guess she comes from a Catholic family. This actually explains a lot about how she sees the world. And it's like, why is she a patriotic American as she is? Well, because God and country, simple as. Fair enough.
On a side note, I actually really love it when comic writers and artists add in those little type of details where it's like it has nothing to do with the overall arching story.
But it gets you to know them as a person more.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And so I do want to do a lot of that. I do want to have multiple instances where we just see something expressed in the character of, the character that, it's like background information, not strictly necessary, but it helps to better inform you as to why characters act the way they do, kind of stuff. So, but yeah, if you're looking for like a particular comic that just integrates religion exceedingly well into its story, I would suggest basically anything by Iconic Comics, because it doesn't beat you over the head with it, but it does remind you that, at least for the characters in the story, religion is an important facet of their lives. Which, by the way, so
luckily for the readers, in this case, the 2x4 has been put down.
So, a bit of a tangent here. When I say the word religion, I'm not using it in the snarky internet sense. I'm using it in a very specifically Geertzian sociological kind of way. So, when I say religion, I'm not talking necessarily about belief in God. I'm including things like, for example, Epicureanism and objectivism within this conversation. As, they don't have it. Those philosophies don't have any belief in God, but they are totalizing philosophies that articulate a series of signs and symbols with which you organize the universe within your mind to give it structure and, again, order. Even if it's just a purely naturalistic order. So that's how we're defining the word religion for the story. Which, again, gives it a little bit more, I don't want to say breadth, but a little bit more range than most people use the term. But I think it's also a better definition of the word religion anyway, so. So, there are... okay, so... At what point... What do you think we should talk about next, in your opinion?
Well, it is your story, so it's like, what other parts do you think would be important for the readers to know when getting into it? So, you can't really... Okay, if you have another thing to say, just say it.
Yeah, okay, so, again, as I said, it's all a love letter to, heroic fiction. So, there's going to be elements from a lot of things in there, but I'm not writing genre fiction. And what I mean by that is I'm not artificially constraining myself into particular boxes for the sake of, convention. There are going to be times where the, how would you say, again, because, like, the Momo story is, an adventure story with mythic elements, and, Eldon's story is a super robot kaiju story, and then Will's story is a fucking magical girl superhero story. So, there's a lot of variety in the story. It's not meant to be for everyone, and it is definitely, at times, an R18 story, especially with the description of the Griffin sacrifice, which it goes into a lot of detail. You can very clearly see inspiration from stories like Berserk and Claymore and, Invincible in the story, even though it's not going to usually be that gory, because there's no real reason that everything always has to be that way. Oh, yeah, because that's what we were talking about. We were talking about metaphysical presuppositions. So, the reason that I'm trying to write the story the way I am is because while I like things like Invincible, I like things, hold on, what the fuck? I like things like Evangelion. Evangelion is one of my favorites. I like, Puella Magi Madoka Magica. The issue I have with them is that they kind of just miss the possibility that they just don't see something. And what I mean by that is, in these stories, you have articulated a universe where the characters are actively being acted against by cosmic powers beyond their comprehension, but there's no indication that there's any kind of counterbalance. The story of Divine Will takes the exact opposite assumption, that even if we don't necessarily know what it is, that there is something that we can do in our situation. We're not entirely powerless. Even when you're in the gutter, you can still find something to do. You can still find meaning and purpose and value in your life, even in the harshest situations. That's a large part of, like, the working behind the ideas behind the story. So, we start off in a situation which is more evocative of something like out of Shin Godzilla, where things have happened and they've happened horribly, and things have gone pretty fucking bad, but they can get worse. But also, at the same time, this isn't the end-all be-all. This isn't the end of the world. There's still much you can do. And there is potentially, that doesn't mean that there's certainly, but there is potentially reason to believe that you do have some kind of metaphysical backing that's actually on your side and not the side of the villains. Which is something, again, that's lacking in Miracle Man. In Miracle Man, there's just this assumption that's like, there's no counterbalancing mechanism in the world. But then you just have to ask yourself, well, that's an assumption. What is your basis for that assumption? And if the last if the last history of fucking modernism, which has its ups and downs. Oh, there's a fucking archer here. Anyway, which has its ups and downs. There's a lot of bad things with, right? There's a lot of bad things with modernism, and there's a lot of good things with modernism. Well, I don't say a lot. It's like everything else. There's no answers. There's only trade-offs. Yeah, so it's like we're not operating under a nihilistic framework. We're just pointing out, it's like, look, even in the worst situation, you don't have any real reason to assume that nihilism is true or even healthy. Like, even in the worst situations, you have people like Catholic saints, Thomists and Scotists, maintain their sanity, and their integrity. You also have Stoics. What was the famous line about the Stoics? To cultivate a character that not even Zeus himself can take from you. And that's the thing, is like the best of the heroic fiction is ultimately predicated on virtue ethics. On the idea that it's not necessary, that your goodness is not predicated on your actions. It's predicated on your character, on the habits that you have cultivated. So, And that's the thing. So the heroes in Divine Will are people who have, even if they do not know this themselves, they have cultivated the habits of virtue. So it's not that they're putting on an act, it's that they really are virtuous people. They don't have to signal it because that's what they are. Does that make sense?
I never, yeah, it's like I never really understood that whole entire virtuous signaling type of thing. It's like if you're being good, you don't really need to tell anyone you're being good. It's like, and it's like we have seen basically situations where people who are very vain try to, yeah, vain, basically want to portray themselves as good to the general public to get their praise. But it's like if you pay attention to their actions, they're basically almost as, if not worse, than the actual people they're trying to oppose, show themselves being good against.
Yeah. So, and you know, not all the ideas that men have are good. So, as you know, I have been, especially recently, on a binge of studying esoterica. I'm not an esotericist, but it became a little bit important when someone reminded me that Karl Marx was a student of Hegel, and I was like, oh Lord, I forgot about this. And it's kind of important because if we're gonna break people down into different religious traditions, then yeah, you can break the West at least down into a couple different religious traditions, which will be explored each in the story. So you could, for example, what the hell? Oh, that's my own characters. My bad. So you could break it down into like the major religious traditions of the West, for example, are paganism. Obviously, it's the oldest of them. I need more lumberjacks. The Abrahamic religions, which, again, not exactly enlightening because most people today are Christians or Jews. So the Abrahamic religions. Then you have the naturalistic religions. You know, people like, again, Ayn Rand, people like the Epicureans. And finally, the fourth religious tradition are the esoteric traditions. The ones that pretend to have secret knowledge. Because let's be fair, none of these motherfuckers have secret knowledge. The people who pretend to have secret knowledge, and they're almost always cult leaders. Like, the number of these people who end up leading cults is astounding. And in that particular case, yeah, a large part of this story is the interplay of people from different religious traditions. Because a lot of these esoteric traditions are apocalyptic, traditions. They are traditions that believe that they can bring about a utopia by bringing about the end of the world through some structured order. So, just think about, for example, actually any of those World War II philosophies. It's like, what's the whole point of fascism? It's like, yes, we can create the utopia by doing exactly as Hegel said, by creating the state, the agent of God in the world, and giving it absolute power. Because the state, being the agent of God in the world, is the means through which we can achieve salvation. Or, as the Nazis did. Where, again, it's like, yes, the way we do this is, we will use eugenics to usher in our salvation by conceding absolute, submission to the agent of God, which in Mein Kampf he calls nature, in the world. If you want to see anything about the Gnosticism of Nazism, watch Tick History. He has an excellent dissertation on that particular subject. Okay, so these guys need to die. But I'm talking off the cuff right now, so a little bit of a charity for the moment. But a large part of the villains are going to eventually be Gnostic wizards, Gnostic cult leaders, because it actually turns out I have an affinity towards Gnostics as villains. Just think about the Big O. The Big O is one of my favorite anime, or even think about Evangelion, another one of my favorite anime. It's like Gendo Ikari, especially in the last movie, is very clearly a Gnostic cult leader. His entire thing is he controls the very language and the symbols around you so that he can control how you think. And what's his goal? He seeks to use a logos outside outside this world, a literal line from the fucking movie. And what's his goal? To escape it. And in fact, to transform it, which is a very hermetic idea. The idea that we can, through wisdom, through gnosis, come to salvific knowledge, and we can use that salvific knowledge if we spread it to all the world. We can use it to transform the very world itself. And in doing so, we can bring heaven to earth. So Marxism, again, comes from Hegelianism, comes from Hermeticism. It's just one big religious tradition that says, hey, if we can get everyone to believe the same thing, or if we can get everyone to conform to the same divine idea, we can basically cause heaven on earth. Absolute bullshit, but it's a thing that just consistently happens in the modern era. Marxism did the same thing with its whole socialism project. The Nazis tried it. The fascists were doing it. It was all just one big Gnostic ploy, very consistently.
It's the world's greatest grift.
And yeah, well, I mean, it really is. It's a grift literally older than writing. But, a lot of my favorite villains are exactly that. They're Gnostics. Again, think about the Big O. Every single one of the villains in Big O is looking for secret salvific knowledge with which they can change the world and remake it in their own image. Because if you want to break Gnosticism down in a quick, snappy soundbite, it's they hate reality and they wish they were God. I mean, Schwarzwald was trying to do the same thing, except he was trying to break the world with his secret salvific knowledge. Alex Rosewater literally wanted to be a god. He even calls himself God's son at one point. So, it's all that. It's just people who hate reality, and they think that they should be the ones to be God. And that's an interesting little villain archetype. It's Agent Smith. Again, he's a demiurge. But what is the demiurge? The demiurge is just that. The demiurge hates reality and he wants to be God. Interestingly enough, the villain of Gnosticism just does what the Gnostic priesthood does. It creates a lie, traps people in the lie, because the true trick with Gnosticism, this is going to be a little bit in the story too, because I do want to write about Gnosticism as a villainous ideology as well. The true trick about Gnosticism is when it tells you the world is a prison and that you are a victim, and that, you can transform the world through your secret wisdom, which is in fact true, and it's the world that's a lie. The only prison is the very idea that the world is a prison. That's the actual trap. That's the real snare. And it's like, yeah, that's a compelling and interesting story right there. To where the Gnostics are the villains. So yeah, expect some degree of there will be Gnostic villains in the story, because I do happen to really like those stories. Yes, this game mocks me by not having the damn. Anyway, so
It was actually new.
So yeah, there will be a lot of exploration specifically of Gnostic themes, because I'm sick and tired of Gnosticism not being explored as a villainous ideology. I've watched a lot of series and read a lot of stories where it's like Gnosticism is somehow relevant to it, almost as if it genuinely does possess some kind of secret knowledge. Just think about Revolutionary Girl Utena, which I guess technically, since critical feminism comes from Marxism, and Marxism is a literal Gnostic philosophy, it just pretends to be an atheist philosophy. Yeah, I guess it makes sense. The most interesting feminist work is secretly a Gnostic work. Okay, fair enough. Or what's another one where the Gnostics are the good guys? The Matrix. The Matrix itself is a large Gnostic parable, but let's be fair, it's all bullshit.
Yeah.
It's what about Gnosticism is worth taking into consideration seriously? There's really nothing. And in fact, actually, I allude to the nature of Gnosticism as a villainous ideology in the text already. So I haven't gotten to this part to revise it, because again, if you're new here, I have finally gotten an editor, and that editor is an AI program which will actually tell me, hey, you're fucking up here. fix this. I was like, okay, yeah, fair enough. Because everyone needs an editor. Because when you've read the same damn thing 50 times, you stop being able to see the mistakes because your brain already knows what's supposed to be there. And so you look like a jackass when you publish this stuff, and it's like, oh, these obvious mistakes in here. It's like, oh, great, I don't have an editor. So now that I have an editor, and it's a extremely good editor, I can finally go and fix some of the stuff that I fucked up on, and then I can continue. Now, granted, I only have 15 chapters to fix, and I've already fixed 6 of them, so it's not going to take very long to catch up so I can get back to writing the story. But yeah, my rant about Gnosticism is kind of important again because there is a big theme of Gnosticism as a villainous ideology in the story. You know, I've already said that, but I kind of need to drive that home because this is definitely going to be something that you will not see in most other fiction. I think the only other fiction I've ever seen where Gnostics were actually the villains is Kill la Kill comes to mind. I mean, Satsuki Kiryuin literally says contradiction is truth. Oh, you I see the dialectic has made its has entered the chat. Or and Soulfinder by Iconic Comics is another one where Gnostics turn out to be villains. The demon Blackfire, who is the main villain of Soulfinder. Soulfinder, by the way, is a comic by Iconic Comics which deals with a priest who is battling a demon named Soulfinder, and the head priest in the first book tells him, "We believe this demon is the root cause of the rise of Gnosticism in the Middle Age, in the early church." It's like, interesting. Granted, it's in a religious context, but it's still interesting that they finally have someone pointing out that maybe Gnostics weren't the good guys. Or maybe that we shouldn't take them seriously. Because when you understand Gnostic, like, when you actually understand Gnostic theology and doctrine, it's like, oh, great, all of these cults that have caused all these problems, they're all Gnostic, almost invariably. It's like, what about Heaven's Gate? Interesting. We're victims, the world is wrong, our ideas are correct, and this secret idea that we have that's more real than the world will help us escape. All it did is it got you killed.
Yeah, it's like I never really understood why it's been taking. Why it basically took forever for them to be portrayed as potential or seen as villains inside many of these works. Because, like, right, it's like
the ideology is literal madness. Like the dialectic.
Yeah, it's like no, hang on. It's like even if you go by what they do and keep the truth about what they're after in the secrets. If you look at throughout all of history of the media, it's like at every single point in time, just about everything is portrayed as a villain at one point or another. I mean, probably or not.
I mean, to be fair, in any ideology, you'll find people who are evil. Well, that's usually because, especially with like good ideologies, let's say Thomism, for example. Well, let's give another one, Objectivism. Like, the people in these particular of these ideological bends are usually pretty good people. But you can probably find someone who claims to represent those things, but then only exemplifies all the bad stereotypes you could possibly think about them. It's not that hard.
True, and I'm not.
It's a numbers game.
I'm not denying it. But so that's kind of negating. That's not really going with my point. My point is like. No matter how much, how many numbers of people you have inside a specific type of group that is actually evil compared to the ones that are good, at a certain point, they're always, at a certain point, someone goes with the idea, it's like, hey, what if these people are actually the villain? Whether justifiably or not.
I mean,
it's strange that...
Have you ever read Rules for Radicals? The foreword is literally a thank you letter to Satan. It's like, interesting.
Yeah.
Who are you again?
My point proven. Yeah, it's like my point proven. But with these Gnostics, it's literally taken so long for even the idea to come up.
So the thing I find interesting, and I want to explore this in the story, is that when you actually examine it, Gnosticism as a religious tradition, like, it's pretended to be pagan, it's pretended to be atheist, and it's because the way it propagates itself is everyone who encounters these things in any meaningful way figures out these people are dangerous very fucking quickly. If you really want an explanation as to why witchcraft was punishable by death in pagan Rome, not Christian Rome, but pagan Rome, it's probably because of these people, the esotericists. Now, the esoteric traditions have pretended to be pagan, they've pretended to be, Abrahamic, and they've pretended to be naturalistic historically, because they understand that in order for their particular tradition to survive, the way it works is that they parasitize. Oh, what an unfortunate place to put that. Is that they parasitize off of the signs, symbols, structures, and language of other traditions. And the reason they do this is because it allows them to propagate their ideas covertly. Now, again, when you study a lot of these people, you figure out these people are fucking evil pretty quickly. How many of the mystery cults do we know the rights of? Well, here's the question. Why don't we know what the rights of the mystery cults in the ancient world were? Ah, interesting. Because the few we do know are blackmail material.
Yeah.
Because these people, they understand that if you want to be a god, you need to get other people to at least, the idea is that they have to get other people to validate this idea that they should actually be God. And so that's exactly what happens, is these people get blackmail material on you so you can't leave. This is obviously, I think you could think of certain religions that I'm not going to talk about right now in the modern day that do this, but one of them that comes to mind is, let's see. I'm trying to think of one that isn't going to get me sued because it's a modern day religion with an organized structure that is basically a company pretending to be a religion. A particular actor is part of it. Anyway, it's like the Orphic Mysteries. The Orphic Mysteries, for example, was a mystery cult, and let's just say it was a bit orgy-tastic. Not exactly something a respectable person would be part of, even in a pagan world. And, it's like, why is it an orgy-tastic religion? Because if the community has blackmail on you, that you're part of this, and that you've engaged with orgies, maybe had a particular illicit affairs that the, Roman world found rightly disgusting, it definitely prevents you from coming out, because then everyone can just make the accusation, and it's like, but you were a part of the cult. So, it's very easy to see why these mystery traditions were, initiate religions in the way that they were. They weren't like... Anyway, you get my point. I'm starting to go off on a tangent here.
I will bring up one last thing for the tangent. Like, I find it funny of how we have so many rules and laws against using blackmail to coerce people to do things, yet these mystery cults that we're not allowed to actually say the name of.
Well, nowadays we just call them cults.
Yeah, it's like... Now, it's like in these cults that are hiding within the shadows that, again, very specific actors are well known to be a part of. It's like they're allowed to just blackmail all their members without fear of any of these type of anti-blackmail rules
Blackmail.
and laws.
But yeah,
blackmail rules and laws.
So we will be talking a lot about Gnosticism in the story. As you can tell, because I'm sitting on a lot of information that would be very, very useful to write from an author perspective, because it's just good ideas. Fuck, where was I going with that? Anyway, so back to the story. Where were we on? We were talking about Gnosticism and how that's going to be a villainous ideology within divine will, because it never died. There are as many Gnostics. Not everyone knows. Here's the thing, there are as many Gnostics nowadays as there are Catholics and Protestants put together. Most people don't know that. And the reason I say this is because, again, in these initiate religions, you don't necessarily have to know the theology in order to be a part of the religion. You just have to, there's different levels in initiate religions like this. One of which is just straight up, you participate, you quote-unquote do the work. But you don't necessarily understand it. But you're still in service of the cult, even though you don't know you're in service of the cult. So it's like a subtle brain worm. Then you have the people who are actually initiates, people who are in the cult. They may not fully understand what it is, but they have more culpability for it. And then finally, you have the people who are in the top, and they know what that particular cult is about. They may even know that it's entirely bullshit. Because I don't think Marx really believed some of the stuff he said, for example. Do you really think Karl Marx thought that through fucking a totalitarian state and socialism, through mass purges, through the indoctrination of all people on Earth, do you really think Karl Marx thought that mankind was going to be able to transmute their species being? Literally, the actual wording he uses there is species being. Important because those aren't the first one is a metaphysical term, so it refers to the nature of what something is, and the second part is an ontological term. It deals with being and existence. It's you really think that he thought that they could, through that method, transform man into a species being who's his own creator? Because that's the whole goal of Marxism, is to move man from a state where he is created and how would you say, disassociated from the products of his labor, into being a man who has effectively re-entered the Garden of Eden, taken a second bite of the apple, and is now master over all things. Just talk to a hardline Marxist and ask how, for example, they deal with natural disasters after the communist revolution. Half the time, you get fucking... What? Wait, what natural disasters? What do you mean? It's the end of history. Yeah, interesting that you use the end of history. End as in, like, the telos, or the purpose of history. So. But I guess we can talk more about that in the story, eh?
Yeah.
So, this just went on a fucking rant about Gnosticism. We gotta avoid this next time we try this.
You already know, like, we're going to go on that rant.
Anyway.
I'm pretty sure our 2 viewers here might be enjoying our rants.
Hopefully they are, because I have no idea what I'm doing on stream, to be perfectly honest. My only hope is that they at least find this interesting.
My question is, does anyone ever understand what they're doing on stream? It's like, do people just log in onto these streams with a game plan and go smoothly with the game plan, or do they just log in and hope for the best?
You gotta learn how to wing it.
I know you said wing it, but it sounded like to me you said wig it.
I mean, I choose to say, even though it's not true, I choose to say that that's what I said because it's funnier.
Screw history, we're rewriting it. It's now wig it.
But yeah, so oh yeah, as I said, like Kill la Kill is another one where like the Gnostics turn out to be a bad guy. Yeah, Satsuki Kiruin does seem like she's a Gnostic herself, but I don't really know how much to take seriously of that, because in the end she ends up being very instrumental in defeating, again, the very clearly Gnostic Ragyo Kiryuin, whose entire goal is the end of history, to transcend, again, being human and effectively become a god. Like, she's very clearly a fucking Gnostic. And it's like, yeah, so there are not every one of the villains is obviously going to be a Gnostic. There are going to be some classic villains which are like, aha, yes, cartoony evil. Because, you know, let's be fair. If you've ever read... I mean, let's be fair. If you've ever read history, you understand that there are people who are just cartoonishly evil. It's just, it happens.
Those 4 cakes are mine.
Right? As much as dumb, as intentionally dumb and funny as like Warhammer 40k is, there are some people who literally are just chaos worshippers.
Hey, some people just want to watch the world burn.
Ah, the classic line. But it's not wrong. There are some people like that.
Yeah.
So there will be characters like that in the story. But that's just because I think that if you want to write good heroes, you need to be able to give them good villains to go up against. And I think if you use... Huh?
And not every single villain has to be such a deep ontological thought process. Sometimes it's just better to have a more simplistic type of evil villain for the hero to go up against.
I mean, do you have how many essays online about people like missing the Disney villains, like the classic, just evil for evil's sake Disney villains.
Yeah. And then the few times Disney has actually tried to turn them good, it's been with very poor results because they didn't understand it either.
I find it weird that they tried to do that with Maleficent, when her name literally, her name is literally Maleficent. What the fuck do you think?
Not only is
Go on.
Not only is that her name, but if she is not only is that her name, but but if you look back at Disney history, she is not a Disney villain. She is the Disney villain.
Yeah,
she is the one who started it all.
She's the prototypical Disney villain. Yes.
and as much confliction as I have with Kingdom Hearts, this is actually one of the main things I do agree that they get right by having Maleficent being such a major threat throughout the entire series. Because again, it's like if she is the one that you look at for Disney villains.
Yeah, I do have to study Disney villains because I would like to be able to have some Disney-style villains in the story. But I'd also like to be able to have at least, go through various villains. Because again, it's pulp fiction. And based off of comics. So most of the characters are not trying to kill their villains. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone's not trying to, but it is meaning that at least Will is not trying to kill her villains. Momo definitely is trying to kill the fairy villains, but she has a massive, let's say, prejudice against killing human villains. So.
No.
But, yeah, so. Hold on. I am going to. Ah, damn it. I'm just gonna go past some of these fuckers just for the sake of it. Nah, never mind.
If it works, it works.
Never mind, I'm just gonna get it here. But, I put this on the wrong setting. I really did, didn't I? Anyway,
Maybe. I don't know anything about the game.
So is there anything that you think people would be interested in? Because we could talk about... I guess we could save maybe discussing the power system. Because, as you know, the power system for Earth, which is technically a classic superpower system you find in most comics, is definitely more consistent, is definitely more thought out than in basically anything else you've probably ever seen. Maybe Worm. I haven't read much of Worm. I do want to at some time. I just haven't had the time. But the system I actually have outlining, for example, how superpowers work, is fucking pedantic in like how it's structured. Part of it is because I wanted it to be consistent, and I wanted it also to be able to replicate what you see in comic books, and that wasn't that hard to do. It just took a lot of time.
While I do know how much work you put into that, it's like that just feels like something that they should either figure or find out themselves, or better yet, put it into an actual separate conversation about basically how power structures work.
Yeah, power systems.
To get a general idea. Yeah, power systems and structures work. To get a general idea on how you came to your conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so we can go into the details of power systems at a later time. But if you had to come up with like your what you think is most approximates what I wrote out for how the system works, what power system do you think most closely matches? I put you on the spot there, didn't I?
Yeah, it's like, quite honestly, if I had to guess, it's like if I had to get like a general idea, and again, I know it's not even close, but for the sake of the conversation,
to be fair,
for the sake of the conversation, it is the closest that I could think of from everything that you've told. Which I do know that there are aspects of the story that haven't told yet, but for the sake of this conversation, the closest systems, sake for the questions, like the closest I could think of is in fact DC Comics.
I mean, I am a massive classic DC fan, so that's not exactly surprising, but at the same time, as you said, while it's the closest, but it's not really anything like it. Like, there's a fucking massive difference between how powers work in DC Comics versus how powers work in Divine Will. And
Yeah.
I guess if you wanted to, without doing any spoilers, could you go off on what you think are the most important non-spoilery differences between those two systems? Is it a style? Is it more of like the science behind it or the metaphysics? What do you think it is?
I kind of have to say it's like a mixture between the three. It's like, okay, so like a perfect example would, as that one video, like as a perfect example, and this is relates to a character I think a lot of people always misconstrues, Batman. It's like the way of how he could actually go toe to toe with many of these type of big all these great heroes and villains. It's completely different than how how a character of yours that has a similar type of motif can do. Whereas, like, where basically the reason why he can do so is because he's been studying, practicing, and basically gathering all the tools needed in order to take on these heroes and villains in case worst case happens. The character that you have designed in order to do so, more or less was built into the role. Whereas, like, he did kind of have a choice, but unlike Batman, where he basically just suddenly became a part of the role, your version of the character, here's like all the work was put into the very beginning for him to be able to do these things. Did that make any sense?
I'm trying to figure out, because I have a lot of these characters, and I'm trying to figure out which one's the closest one to Batman now, to be perfectly honest. I'm trying to figure out, which one are you talking about? Because I have a couple of badass normal heroes slotted. It's just, I think, you're not going to see anyone of them be able to go toe-to-toe with a Superman. That's for damn sure. But...
Okay, let me get more into a little bit more detailed type of situations. Like, so with Batman, the reason why he's able to go toe to toe with, say Superman, is that he studied Superman's biology for a longest time, built an armor that could withstand many of his blows, gathers up kryptonite in order to actually take him on, or if we go by the New 52 route and a little bit later, he gets the vampire armor, which is basically New God plus tech that allows him to go toe to toe.
I hate that arc so much.
Oh, I do too. But it says like, I do too. But it says like, so that's basically how Batman handles the situation. Your version of the character that I can state, and again, I know the equation's not exactly there, but it is the closest I could think of. It's like, your character, well, he wasn't like, hang on, my mouth's moving faster than my brain.
I have that problem too at times. That happened a couple times to me in this very stream.
Yeah. So with your characters, like, unlike Batman, who basically just decided to go, you know what, I want to be hero. I know there's more to the story, but I'm just using it as a gross simplification. Your character was basically recruited to become a soldier who can actually handle these type of creatures.
Oh,
and
I know who you're talking about now. Funny enough, Captain America was more of an inspiration for those characters than like Batman was, but.
Oh, I know. But so, the one that you put the most focus on, I can see people equating him to Bat.
Really?
That's why I decided to actually. Yeah.
I would never have guessed that. I would have guessed more like Nick Fury or Captain America.
The problem is, neither of those two goes to the same extreme levels that Batman does, that your character will end up going.
Oh, well, yeah, to be fair, the Super Soldier program of the War Masters is fucking insane. It's like something more out of a fucking Halo novel than it is a fucking, traditional comic.
But so that's kind of the reason why I'm bringing it up. It's like, again, it's like,
you stumped the hell out of me there. I could not figure out who you were talking about. I was like, what fucking character are you talking about? I was like, oh, okay, now I know who you're talking about, because it's like, If you had said Nick Fury or fucking, like Captain America, it would have been really quick for me. But it's like, oh no, okay, never mind. Note to self. Now I need to look out for that kind of shit. Okay, so continue on your thought.
Again, it's like, well, with Batman, and it's like if you go back to the early days of Batman's run, it's more. Again, there's more to it, but this is a gross simplification. It's like, basically, it's like I had a bad experience, so I want to become a hero to prevent other people from having that experience. And thus, he kind of just jumps straight into it head first. Later on, the added aspects, like he gets trained by professional fighters in the League of Assassins, or he basically encounters people who can actually build his tech for the cheap, these advanced tech for cheap. But for your character, you bring into a different type of route where instead of him just jumping into the situation, it's like the way on how he can actually handle these type of major threats is built into him from the very beginnings.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're talking about. It's not it. I see what you're talking about. I don't think this is much of a spoiler because this isn't really a reveal. It's more of a thing that you find out in the, and it kind of goes with the idea of like the whole purpose is to recreate like a comic book style universe with elements from like Chinese and Korean and Japanese fiction as well. So, and that includes like, putting elements you find in video games, because let's be fair, to be perfectly honest, the character you're talking about fits more in a fucking like good old school gun boy video game, something more along the lines of like fucking not the Warhammer game, what's the game where they have to fight the aliens and they're in the fucking almost Warhammer power armor? Oh, I'm gonna remember this after stream and I'm gonna kick myself in the face.
I mean, it's like the standard. Standard Spartan type of armor. Again,
it's like, as I said, they fit more in like a Halo setting than they do like a traditional superhero setting. But yeah, so I think what you're saying is that it's a large part of the story is about people becoming, transforming themselves through one way or another to meet the challenges, and that sometimes transformation, even extreme transformation, is necessary. Is that what you're getting at?
Yes, like basically, rather than the whole entire, it's like this newbie suddenly becomes this godlike being who can handle these things. Like you give them more of an in-depth reason on how said characters can turn into these hero figures, and how they're able to actually keep up with not only their growing powers, but basically the situations themselves.
Okay, yeah, okay. Now I'm starting to track what you're saying. Yeah, you confused the fucking hell out of me for a while.
I kind of figured that. That's why I decided to go in a little bit more detail, but it's like I'm not sure how much information to actually give, or how much information am I actually remembering.
I mean, to be fair, I trust you. Basically, anything that's already been revealed is fair game.
Fair enough.
Because it's like the chapter's already out there, and we're 15 chapters in. It's not like I'm gonna stop at 20.
Fair enough.
But yeah, the War Masters in particular are fucking nightmarish. Because you and me have talked a lot about not just how to make a War Master, but also what makes the War Masters so exceedingly dangerous. And I think you would agree, it's just like in any kind of context, these things, like these people would be fucking nightmares in human clothing. Yeah. It's not that they're so powerful, it's just that they don't fuck around kind of deal. Like these people, they may be good guys, but good guys are dangerous, and these particular good guys they're killers. they're here, they're there, and they're like, look, man, I've seen shit you wouldn't believe, and if I have to kill you to make sure that doesn't happen again, I'm sorry, but it's gonna happen. But the reason that there's such nightmares like that is because they just don't have the sheer power that someone like Will does. Will is phenomenally powerful, but that means that she has more grace, in a sense, in order to not be as nightmarishly horrifying as they are. Because let's be fair, it's like to be fair, which one of them do you think in general has more leeway to take risks? Will as the Lolita princess or a War Master?
Will, actually.
Huh? Yeah, it's Will.
I said Will.
That's why she in a very real sense, she has the luxury to be able to take risks. The War Masters don't. They work in a paramilitary setting, which means that if they fuck up, so one of their battle buddies could die. So it's not just their lives at risk, it's also the lives of their like comrades and potentially their friends and family, because most of their families are in the GSSDO bases. So if the base is invaded, then their families are in danger. In a very real sense, they have more on the line to risk. That's why they're monsters. And you know, the way you said that, it kind of makes me think you didn't notice that before.
No, I kind of did, but it's one of those type of things, like, it's kind of in the subconscious of your head, and you don't really...
You don't realize that you know it until later?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But, yeah, so, as you can tell, that's directly written into the underlying assumptions there. So... The War Masters are definitely the ones that I have the most interest in getting to the side stories of. Like, the alien worlds are cool and all. I have a bunch of notes on, for example, Hecate's cultures and languages, and, like, Hecatean religion and society. So, yeah, I do want to eventually get to the alien planets. But, you know, that's going to be Elden's side story. But the War Masters in Elden's story, I think, are going to be the most interesting ones. Because, again, they're fundamentally different than most of the other characters in the story. And there's a damn good reason why the soldiers who work with them are fucking terrified of them. Even though they're on the same side. You know, it's like the kind of thing where it's like you talk to your friend and your friend's a fucking badass, but then sometimes you just have to tell him, John, you scare me sometimes, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's basically that.
Wait, where am I being attacked? Oh. Oh, one of the scouts got there first. So, yeah. What else is there? I put a lot of work into trying to make sure that this world works. My major problem has been mechanical, and that's why I've needed an editor. And as you know, I've struggled to get people to edit my work for a long time. So now that I actually have an editor, I'm fucking elated, to be perfectly honest. I am quite excited.
Well, I will say that the major problem that you kind of had is because, like, you kind of don't have the money to get an actual proper editor, so you kind of been asking people who either have no experience on editing or basically rudimentary experience.
That's true. That's true, and I understand that.
Yeah, so I'm saying, like, that was kind of your major issue for the most part. It's like, it's one of those situations, like, take what you can. It was one of those take what you can get type of situations.
Yeah, and to be fair, it's not like I complained about it. I just grit my teeth and just moved forward.
Yep.
Like, if there's one thing you can't accuse me of, at least with writing, it's of being a fucking complainer. Because I don't complain. I don't complain. I just get annoyed.
Yep.
But yeah, I have tons of kaiju. I have a lot of villains slotted for this story. This is a project I want to work on for decades, personally. And I think it'll work. I think people will be interested in this, especially as I gets through. Because one of the things I find interesting is reading a story and watching an author's, like, skill grow. I find that fascinating. That's actually one of the reasons I really like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I mean, yeah, it's a good story. It's fun. It's a fucking bizarre adventure. But I find it fascinating to watch how Araki actually developed as a writer while writing JoJo's. And I'm not the only person out there. There are a lot of people who find that interesting. So the idea is like, look, I have a good idea. I know the idea is good. And I'm structuring it in such a way that is fundamentally charitable to someone doing experimental writing. It's web fiction. It's, pulp fiction. It's not necessarily meant to be some grand epic. It's really a series of small, small battles told as a story. But that's what American comics has always been. They have their grand stories, but let's be fair, what's the core of an American comic? It's all the little fights along the way.
Yeah.
So, that's why I picked that particular style.
Fair point.
But as said beforehand, if you want to know more about the power system, basically the entire rundown of the science of how these powers work and the metaphysics of different worldviews and how these powers work is completely outlined on Campfire. At some point, I will probably... Actually, when I go through and start putting hyperlinks, because it's a fucking web novel, I might as well put hyperlinks throughout the web novel so that if you don't know what it is, you can just click on the fucking link and you can go there, right? So
yeah,
I don't have to write. I don't necessarily have to dumb down the physicist in order to write the story, because it's like, why don't I just link you to the literal definition of the word? That way you can understand it, or maybe like a PBS SciShow. Episode that'll explain the concept so that you can understand it. The whole thing about this is like, I don't assume my readers are idiots. I assume my readers have the common sense to be able to either figure out what it is based on context, or if they need help, they can just click the link that'll lead them to the definition of the word. Because some of these words are kind of hard to find, and they're very specific. Like, when we first meet the aliens, I use words like mesorhini and things like hyperbrachyscelic, but I give you what the definition of the word is by hyperlinking to something that'll tell you what it means. These are medical terms and anthropological terms, and they pack a lot of meaning into a short space, but that's why I used it, so I don't have to, create this sea of words to describe something very simple. I just use the technical term when necessary to, save space. It's literally that simple. And it's like, and if this was a written, if this was a paper book, where that would be a fucking nightmare, because it's like, oh great, now I gotta now get this book to understand what this means. Oh, now I need to get a lesson to understand this. It's like, no, it's a web novel. I could just literally link you to the necessary context of something outside there. It's like, maybe you don't know what makruk is, or maybe you don't know what ok chatranj is. Well, then why don't I just link you to a thing that actually tells you how to play these games? Or it's that simple.
Although I will bring up a potential issue is, like, I have actually seen some web novels that try to go down this type of route, and then they just bog their entire thing with so much stuff that they need hyperlinks that the reader can't actually follow the actual story. Like, they have to constantly pause to look at it. So it's like,
that is true. I am aware of this danger. I am aware of this danger. Now, you could, in theory, use that to actual effect. If, for example, you have someone who has an audience stand-in, and then you have, academics talking around them, and you're intentionally making that conversation obtuse so that you can engender the experience of the listener in the story. Be like, what the fuck are you people talking about? You could do that, but that would be something you would want to do very sparingly, and just to create a feeling. Not to style on your fucking reader. Just, create the sensation that the character is going through. But again, I assume my readers are going to have, common sense and intelligence, so that as time goes on, every once in a while you'll see a new word, and if you don't know what it is, you can click on the hyperlink if you can't figure out what it means in context, because most of the time you're going to be able to figure out what it means in context. I don't have to give you a link to the word hyperanthrope. I made that word specifically for the technical language of the story, and I just give you the fucking definition. So, and that's not exactly that difficult. But first, again, some of these medical terms is like, if I'm describing to you 6 different aliens from 6 different planets and therefore 6 different like lineages, and I have to tell you that one is hypermacroskelic, one's brachyskelic, and the other one is, mesoskelic, then it's going to just bog down the text if I have to constantly define each of these terms as I'm giving you a precise description of what they are. So in that case, I just give you the hyperlink. So it's like, look, this is what it is. This is what context it develops in. Here you go. And it's just that. But that's because in context, it actually makes sense that those particular words are being used. They're not used all the time. They're used in very specific conditions. But I do understand your concern. That's like, you don't want to get bogged down in too much technical detail. That's one of the things that everyone hates about Tom Clancy, to be perfectly honest. It's like, you read a Tom Clancy book sometimes, and you're like, Tom, what the fuck are you on about?
Yeah, like, so if you kind of limit those hyperlinks to stuff like, say, medical type conditions, or where basically the reader is like, okay, I don't really need to fully understand this in order to enjoy the story. All I need to know is this is some sort of medical condition, then that is fine. But if you're basically making key plot points where basically they have to actually constantly lead the story in order to figure out what's going, what the hell you're talking about, that's where the issue arises.
Oh yeah, no. So in general, I want to have the characters speak naturally to each other. So if 2 characters should understand something at the same time, then I'm not going to have them explain it. But that's why you insert a 3rd character in situations like that. That way, if the conversation is being explained and the character doesn't understand it, and you don't expect your reader to necessarily understand it, the academics involved, or the people with experience, the professionals involved, can then explain it to the reader by explaining it to the person, the third party in the conversation. That's the way this is usually worked around. I'm just saying that oftentimes, especially in web fiction, you can get around this by just using the fact it's web fiction, that you can, get around it through the use of the tools of the, fact it's a web page. It's not my first go-to, it's just a thing that I know is there. I will, though, use quite a number of hyperlinks, not necessarily for important stuff, but just things like, hey, maybe you want to know how to play this game that's mentioned, but not necessarily centered upon. Like, I mentioned the game Ludus Latrunculum, which is a Roman game, and it's not really relevant to the plot. It's just something that came up in conversation. It's like, oh, do you want to know what that is? Here's a hyperlink for you. You can read it yourself. You can learn how to play it yourself. But it's not going to come up later in the story. It's just straight up not going to happen.
Yeah, it's like, and if you keep it only to basically like minor stuff, like, hey, if you're interested in what's being said here more than in what's necessary to understand the story, it'll work like that. Like,
I have to use my time in anthropology classes for something, damn it.
On a slight tangent, it's kind of like with the Watchmen comic or V for Vendetta, where basically it's like,
I'm not reading that wall of text. I'm reading a fucking comic.
Look, we understand you have a degree. You have an English degree. You don't have to use it for everything.
Right. I do like Watchmen. I do like V for Vendetta, but I do also like to make fun of Alan Moore being like, wall of text, didn't read. it's a fucking comic, my dude. You don't have to go on fucking Shakespearean prose for this. I ever tell you about the time when I was living in Austin and I went into a fucking comic book store and Lost Girls was just fucking right there in the back? It was just like out in the open. I was like, okay, I didn't expect this. I'm scared now, Jim.
Cool story, bro.
No, but that was the thing that did happen. I was kind of freaked out about it. I was like, I know what this is. I wouldn't be putting this out in the open. I'm not saying it should be censored or anything. If I was a comic book store owner, it'd be something I'd put in the back and be like, if you ask for it, we'll give it to you, but we're not necessarily going to be putting it out in the open.
It kind of reminds me.
In general, if I owned a bookstore and we were selling pornography, I would not be having the pornography out in front. I would very much have that.
Okay, like, they kind of actually remind me during the early days when when manga and anime were being brought over to the West, and everyone's still under the mindset like, hey, it's Japanese cartoons. It's still like it's basically Pokemon, and so and they would basically instead of researching what they're getting, they would just basically put it on the shelves in the kids section. So you have people taking these screenshots of basically these very gory or pornographic type of anime or manga and put in the kids section.
I remember that classic. I remember that classic photo of the fucking kid who got the blue girl for his birthday. I'm like, what a funny picture! And God, do I hope that picture's a shitpost. What a funny picture, but yeah, it's like, funny picture, but God, do I hope that's a shitpost and not real. Alright, so we've kind of rambled on just about this. But yeah, there's just a lot of things I want to do with this, and I've intentionally structured the story in such a way that I should be able to accomplish the things that I want to do with it. Because I've given myself, like, to be fair, plenty of time. Like, if the only real need for the story to end is the main character fucking dies, right? Then I basically have all the time in the world that the story has bought me.
I mean, it's basically the same thing with Oda and One Piece. Like, how's the story end? They find a One Piece. Like, at any moment, he can just basically say, next island, One Piece.
Right.
And then the story ends.
Right. and we all, myself included, fucking raged at this bullshit ending. But again, I put she dies in the very front of the fucking story. So it's like, I opened this thing up like Starman. Let's be fair. You don't go into Starman expecting a happy ending. You go into Starman knowing this motherfucker's gonna die.
Yeah.
What the fuck? Uh-oh.
What happened?
Not. Getting it. Like, my scout is picking off a bit more than he could chew. Anyway.
You used to really practice Fortress 2 more often. Your scout skills are bad.
But, yeah, so the whole thing is just a love letter to heroic fiction. It's like, and I do have references to stuff outside of what I do know in order to make sure that I do have, you know, the correct understanding of things. For example, if I want to have something that heavily leans on, for example, exploring a reinvention of, like, the Transformers, for example, I could probably just go to Omega. But on the other hand, if I wanted to know something about fucking Toho, I'd probably be wisest to go to you.
Indeed. Why must you out me on a stream? I kid. I'm very open. I'm actually a big fan of that series.
Did I send you the video of the fucking Rimuru with the machine gun?
Yes, you did.
Do you know that I think that model is actually free?
Now, I have questions about that model. It's like, I know Zune is very open when it comes to basically what fans and what he allows fans to do, and quite honestly, I say if you're designing a fan base if you're designing a work, you should allow your fan base to be as open as Zune does. But I question that model because, like, is it the actual artist who's allowing the people to actually use that model or not? Because as free as Zune allows people to be with the series, like, that is one thing he does bring up. Is like, don't use other people's fan works of his stuff without their permissions, just because they are the original creators of said fan works.
I really need to look into the Zune guy, because every time you talk about him, I'm like, I like the cut of his jib.
It shouldn't take me long, but I can actually find you the list that he has for of how his fan base should work, and it's actually quite simple. It's like, if you're creating fan works of his stuff, remember to credit that is a fan work of his stuff.
Classic
You
copy
can-
left.
Yeah. Don't use the creations of other fans' works without their permission. And if you're basically creating a fan work, don't create anything professional for marketing to be an actual competitor to his work. Like, it's all basically simple stuff. Whereas,
and this is
when
a
you-
lot of common sense too, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that's the one thing I really like about that's one of the things that helped draw me over to into the Toho series. It's like the way of how he structures the entire fan base, which is kind of odd to see here that the actual creator himself is the one who structured the fan base. But that he structured it in a way that actually is very logical. It's like everything makes common sense, and he's not trying to force anything onto the fan base. It's like, I know that you guys are a fan of these characters. I know you want to put them inside situations that you want to create. Go for it. I just want you to be common sense and respect not only the characters, but also the other fans themselves.
Based.
That's pretty much what it boils down to. Along with, don't try to use his characters to be a competitor in the market, which is also a very common thing. It's like everything about how he structures a fan base is very common and not overbearing.
I think you mean common sense, because you're saying common,
Yeah,
but you're
common
leaving
sense.
out the sense.
Yeah, common sense and not overbearing. And that's also kind of the reason why Toho has such a major fan base, for better or for worse, is because it is so free and open. Like you can enter into it and not really cause any issues just being in there.
Fair. As you know, I know basically nothing about Toho, so.
Yeah. Don't worry. It's like if a conversation ever comes up that requires information about Toho, it's like, again, it's like world structure, and we were talking about basically how a fantasy world can be set up, or a good way of how it's set up. You can just come to me and it's like, boom, I can bring up the Toho project and help structure it.
Fair. Ah, there it is. That's the town center. Anyway.
Well, that went on to a very weird tangent.
I was wondering where this thing was. What was I thinking about? We were just talking about, Oh yeah, we were, what were we talking about before we went to the Toho stuff?
You're talking about that basically how you like to look at stuff that you're not really an expert on, and the way of how you do so is that you have others who can tell you about them.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's like, I figure if I am not an expert on the subject, then I probably shouldn't be the one to say anything about it. You know, again, very common sense. So if I need information on, like, Transformers, I'll just go to Omega, and if I need information on Toho, I'll just go to you. Because it doesn't help that y'all have a literally autistic attention to detail. Where's the priest? Oh, here he is.
It's like I say this all the time, but I never really understood the fact of how many of these companies will bring in people who openly admit they are not fans or do not understand the specific works that they're going into, and question why the works end up becoming bad. It's like if you're going to bring someone in order to actually work on said project of a long established franchise, bring in someone who's actually been known to be a big fan. It's like, I know it's never going to happen, but it's like, say one day I get called in to direct the next Dragon Ball movie, and there's no way for me to get out of it. It's like, if that ever happens, which again, I'm pretty sure there's like 101% chance that's ever going to happen.
We're talking
It's like,
purely in the realm of pure counterfactual here.
Yeah, it's like, if that situation ever happens, and it's like, I'm not going to go into there completely blind. What I'm going to do is bring Omega, since because he himself is a huge Dragon Ball fan. So I'll bring him along so I can make sure I'm getting everything right.
I mean, yeah, that would be the common sense thing to do.
But sadly, it seems like common sense has been dead for a long time because we can go back to long ago of works that basically don't do that, of these long established franchises.
I mean, yeah, sadly. Although I do think, oh man, have you been on the Reddit page for DC?
No, I kind of been off of a lot of DC for a long time.
No, I'm not talking about the
Like-
the comics. I'm just saying the Reddit, the subreddit for DC Comics.
Yeah, I've also been off of them for a while as well.
They have the transgressive flag on the on the fucking logo. I'm like, oh no, you have
Somehow.
the transgressive Gnostic flag.
I am somehow not surprised.
I can't wait. I can't wait for the transgressive holy month to be over.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So anyway, out of this dark, depressing type of stance, like, should we move on to a different topic before we go down this tangent that'll get you kicked off of Twitch?
Right? Oh my god. Well, I'd be safe on Twitter. I've said stuff like that on Twitter. Be like, this is not really about gay people. This is about gay Gnosticism, and I can prove it. Let us open up the holy books about the literally, they call themselves it, queer theory. It's like, really? Really? This is what we're gonna call ourselves now? Not me, because I'm not a part of that particular community. I'm just saying. It's like, really? In general, it's like, this is what people are gonna call themselves now?
We truly live in a civilized society.
Right? Where is the fucking barracks? Oh, the barracks is over here somewhere. Ah, here it is. Anyway, is there anything else you can think of that you might want to talk about regarding the story?
The story itself, not really, since because I think that's more something that you should bring up. But I think we kind of covered up the gist on what people should expect when going in. Like we might cover some parts more than we should have. But it's like, or especially with our weird tangents. But I think for the most part, we covered everything that a new reader should know about before entering.
Yeah, I'm definitely not in the one thing is I'm definitely not in this whole like invincible MC thing. It's like, to be fair, Will is extraordinarily overpowered. She just doesn't understand how her powers work right now. And even when you're laughing because you know it's fucking true.
No, I actually coughed.
Oh, okay. But the whole thing is like, but that doesn't really help because it's like, again, a lot of this, like, the power system is based on hacks. It's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter if you can, like, lift a mountain if I can just stop your heart by looking at you.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, cool, bro. And it's like, that's not really cheap. It's just like a actual just pointing out. It's like, yeah, wrong context ability right here.
Yeah.
Oh, these guys are not gonna make it. I think I went through like 2 towns before these guys finally started dying on me. So yeah, it's definitely some new ideas that, not really new ideas, but ideas you don't see in comics are intended to be explored. Oh shit, I'm on the last team apparently.
Oh, well.
I wasn't paying attention. I was just doing this in the background.
Good luck, bro.
There we go. What the fuck? What was I thinking about? I can't remember.
Well, I can't really help you there because we were moving on to a different topic when you forgot what the topic you were moving on to was.
Right. This is a pretty small map, actually. That's why this went by so fast. What is that? Oh no, where is he? But, yeah, so I'm trying to do something that's at once quite traditional with the standard Pulp Fiction format, but at the same time a little bit. I don't want to say. I guess would you consider the structure of the story experimental?
I wouldn't really say experimental, just because something outside of
Because I think you would.
some of the things that
Because I think you would agree with
outside
me that it's
something,
a pretty standard format for Pulp Fiction.
yeah, it's kind of it is the standard format for Pulp Fiction, but so like I say outside of the things that we basically went on a huge tangent about. But for the most part, I wouldn't say that you are being experimental with it. You know, all I'll say is like I think you're just trying to add your own flair to what's our own to the standard formula.
I mean, to be fair, it is definitely a specifically me work.
Yeah.
There is a lot of analytical effort put into this, and as you know, I am a very analytical person.
Indeed, you are.
So, yeah, there's just a lot of plans I have for this. I don't really know what to say. We will eventually make videos about, and I'm gonna have you help me write some of these videos. We will eventually make videos about different elements, kind of like how Ruby did. F in the chat for Ruby, boys. But kind of like how Ruby did with things like semblances and stuff like that. It's like, nah, all of these are going to get explained in the story for specifically Will, because Will is definitely the one who doesn't know any of this, so she's going to need to be told this stuff. But I just figured it would also be good to have something for like really quick cross-reference. It's like, okay, so maybe you're like a new time viewer and you just want to understand this topic at least in some like surface level degree. It's like, okay, there you go. Like, okay, so what makes the superpower system unique? There's no genetic element to it, but it's still hereditary. How the fuck does that work? It actually turns out it works in a very common. I think you would agree. The way I have it set up is actually very deceptively sensible.
Yeah.
Because I've had a lot of people tell me, it's like, wait, if it's hereditary, how come it's not genetic? And it's like, because genetic and hereditary are two different things by definition. That's why you can have things like Mendelian and Lamarckian heredity.
Yeah.
So, and I just gotta say this here, the way the power system is set up is I'm gonna use an example, right? I'm gonna use an example as a bit of a nerd and a weeb myself. Ask yourself the following question: if Superman was raised by mutants, so let's do the crossover verse here, where we're just assuming Marvel and DC characters live in the same world. Hellish place to live, but let's just assume it's not a fucking nightmare to live there. If Superman was landed on Earth and was raised by two mutants, he wouldn't develop mutant powers because he's got no X gene. On the other hand, and as you know, if he landed if he was raised by two metahumans from my story, he would very certainly develop superpowers specific to earthly metahumans, because the whole thing is based off of lineage, and not necessarily blood lineage. It's adoptive, foster, gestational, all that stuff. It's like, are you in a real sense the parent to this child? Yes. Well, then their inheritance is their inheritance from you is superpowers. Simple as. Go cry about it, fucking mutants.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an interesting take, because like you have like settings in fictional stories where it's like magic power can be transmitted that way, but it's not so commonly given to just straight up superpowers. I was like, okay, well, why don't we just do that? So I think that that's going to be the thing. I think that that's probably going to be the biggest thing to play with. Isn't necessarily the powers themselves. I think the most interesting way to play with these powers is be like, okay, considering the fact that it's not genetic, so therefore you don't have to have some magic gene like the X gene or the DC Comics meta gene. What does that mean for, you know, these communities? What does that mean for someone who was born in this particular community, right? But not born to it, but, you know, adopted into it. What does it mean if, for example, like, unlike quirks, or let's use the quirk for example, right? Technically, if you took a person from My Hero Academia who has a quirk, or, you know, X-Men with an X gene, let's be fair, they're the same goddamn thing. If you took a mutant or a quirk user, and they were raised by a metahuman from my story, they would have both quirk powers and metahuman powers. For the very simple reason that, again, it's not genetic, so it's ontologically a different power system. And there's really nothing that, like, there's really no mechanism for which these two things interact with each other. It would just literally be, you now possess two superpowers. Simple as. So I do think that that's just kind of funny. It's just one of the logical implications. I'm not going to have magic genetics in the story, just because I think it's a bit overplayed. But I do think that that's probably going to be an interesting thing to just deal with. Is, again, if it's not a genetic thing, what are the consequences to superpowers being passed on through other than genetic lines? And some of the consequences I think are actually rather severe, in both a good and a bad way. What about you? Because this is public knowledge. This is actually one of the selling points of me for the magic system is, and that's why I'm not shy about sharing this. I think that this idea, if you share it to people, would actually get people interested in the story. Is that you don't get superpowers just because you were born to a superpowered bloodline. If you were born to a superpowered bloodline, you develop superpowers. If you were adopted by superhumans, you develop superpowers. If you were fostered by superhumans, you develop superpowers. Hell, if you were a gestational surrogate, and your gestational surrogate mother is a superhuman, you develop superpowers. I think that that's actually quite interesting because it raises a number of questions, because it's obviously tied, and even my uncle, not an avid, he's a smart guy, but he's not an avid reader. Even he immediately picked up on, so this is all about family. It's like, yes, the fucking Fast and Furious meme, right? Darkseid may be powerful, but he's not. But nothing stronger than family. Oh my god, I need to make that now. Yeah, so it directly ties into the idea of family. It's like, okay, what is fatherhood and motherhood, and therefore, what is sonship and daughtership? Daughterhood?
Yeah.
What is the word for that? I actually don't know what you. Because I know sonship is the male version. What the fuck is the word for daughter? Anyway.
I'll be honest. Daughterhood actually sounds better than daughtership.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, and I say until we find out what.
I'm just gonna use daughterhood for right now, just because. Yeah, because it sounds better.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, and it's an interesting idea because there's a lot of things you can do with that. It's like, okay, so you can literally, like, if you give your son up for adoption and his parents just happen to be metahumans, let's say you want to meet your son one day, or your son wants to meet you, bibbity bobbity boo, your son has superpowers. I bet you didn't fucking expect that, right? just like pointing that out there, it's like, what a family reunion, right?
Yeah.
Or Again, it's like just because it brings up ideas of a family inheritance. It brings up ideas of like what is your obligation to your adoptive, your stepchildren, your foster children, your biological children. Like, do they differ? Now, granted, I don't think they do, but do they differ? And you can explore that from a number of different angles, and that's all just literally woven into the power system. Literally, there's a line of inheritance that's woven into how superpowers work in this particular setting. Ooh. Alright, when I finish destroying this last team, the stream's gonna end, okay?
Okay.
I do believe this
How long do you think that's going to be?
Probably this last town head, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, that doesn't give me an estimate.
Maybe 10 minutes.
Fair enough.
It could be longer, but maybe 10 minutes.
Okay.
But, what the fuck is this? Oh, that guy.
Well, wild advertisement stream that we did.
Right. Wait, well, we're not professional advertisers, so we wouldn't know how to do this. That said, you die?
And I thank you 3 people who have been along with us for this entire journey. Granted, 2 of you guys keep on disappearing and reappearing. Not sure what's up with that, but it's like, I thank you 3 for sticking with us throughout this entire adventure as we figure out what the hell to say.
Right, much obliged. It's all a learning curve. I'll eventually get better at this. At least with the advertising part. But,
one of these days. Who knows? The internet might still be as we know it today. By then.
But, what the hell was I thinking about? But, oh yeah, it's like, because I think that the power system in particular, because there is a massive fascination with people in, like, the anime, manga, and comics community. And even the film communities about, like, power systems. There are entire essays about how magic works in Harry Potter to a absurdly pedantic degree. There are, like, essays on how, for example, like, quirks work. How the, you know, the X-Men's, oh, I told you, not even 10 minutes. But, Portuguese, how is that an achievement? The Portuguese are literally the most overpowered fucking team in this game. There's literally a building at the end stage where you can build and it just automatically farms new material for you out of the ether. I'm like, that's busted. What the fuck? But, anyway, so, where were we? Oh, yeah. But so, yeah, I do think that the power system in particular is going to be extremely useful for advertising this. I just need to be able to make the actual videos in order to get this working. And I do need to probably do a little bit of work on things like Illustrator and Photoshop. But if Clip Paint Studio turns out to be more effective, and I want to test that out, and actually, you wanna look at the Clip Paint Studio after I end stream?
Maybe later. I have a few things to do on my end.
So tomorrow then.
What? Yeah.
Okay. So we'll look at the Clip Paint Studio stuff, because Emirichu thinks it's actually working pretty well, at least for comic stuff. And hell, maybe I can turn this into a comic at some point. That would be rather interesting, but it'll just be a webcomic, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
Everything I'm doing right now is a web. Maybe one day some of this stuff will get into printed sheets, but I don't really see it because I don't really have an interest in doing that.
Especially with everything that's been happening inside the printed version of comics.
Do you think some fucking intersectional Gnostic editor is gonna look at the stuff I've written and be like, ah, yes, green stamp of approval? It doesn't matter how well written it is. They're gonna take one look at some of the villains and they're gonna be like, it me. Denied.
Yeah, it's like not only that, but said we've actually had cases where it's like people who try to go outside and do exactly what they say, it's like and make their own, as an actual legit competitor that's actually doing
And they
good,
succeed.
and they just no, not only see, but that the narcissistic establishment would actually openly try to prevent them from making any of the printed work that they wanted to do. Like they actually go to the actual publishers and try to convince the publishers to bar these specific works.
Yeah, that's true. But
which I have a lot of complaints on why they're actually allowed to legally do that.
I'm not gonna lie. To be perfectly honest, if I was gonna make any of this into a comic at some point, I'd have to get a lot of practice drawing because I just do sketches, so I'd have to learn a lot about like form and structure for like comics on a printed page. But if I was ever gonna do something like that, I would probably only do business with maybe Iconic Comics, or Antarctic Press, and the Rippaverse.
Yeah.
That's literally it, because I don't trust DC or Marvel. And in fact, I want to continue to own the shit that I make. So, yeah, I am not going to give it to DC or Marvel, because they're going to demand that I like not have ownership. And to be perfectly honest, I don't really trust Image Comics anymore either.
And, like, when I say publishers, I don't mean basically, like, these companies like DC and Comics. I mean, like, well,
oh, you mean the people? Okay, I know who you're talking about now. The people who actually print the books, not the. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One thing I will say is like because of this major push that they did, Diamond, who, let's be honest, has always been a very sketchy company, even though everyone uses them, has actually been losing businesses, as many of these companies are going to the other type of printing competitions.
Yeah, I don't really keep track of Diamond per se, but again, I didn't really have any intention to print this stuff on paper anyway. So, because if I really wanted to print it on paper, I'd have to rewrite everything. But that's because I think that there are fundamental differences between how things should be written on paper and how things should be written on a website. Because it's like the layout, the very medium you're working with is so fundamentally different. Yeah, you have to structure an actual like, paper comic or an actual paper novel the way it is because of the constraints of the fact that you're working on a sheet of paper that has a very specific surface area that you're limited to. And you only have a certain number of those. But on a web novel or a web comic, you don't have that particular restriction. There's things you can do there that you can't do here. For example, you can I know you probably don't know what ergodic literature is, but there's a lot of experimental works where they actually do very inventive things with page layout that are actually really fascinating and really eye-catching. You couldn't possibly do it on a web series, though. It would not work. Just straight up would not work. There's and the same thing with like comics. I see Gunner Krigg Court on like, and I enjoy Gunner Krigg Court quite a bit, but it's a web comic that's structured like a comic you hold in your hand. That doesn't make any sense. It's like, if you're gonna make a comic online, you should probably make it something like a webtoon, because webtoons, it makes sense. You're looking at one panel at a time. You're scrolling on your phone. Even when you're on a computer, it's easier to just read it by using the scroll key on your fucking mouse, and just going one panel at a time. And you can still do inventive stuff with that, but you shouldn't be making a handheld page for your webcomic online, because even on a monitor like mine, which is fairly large, it doesn't come out the right way. It's just like, why would I read it this way when I could just read it in the webtoon fashion? It makes more intuitive sense on a computer, even if it's a phone. So it's like, I'm not going to write this in a way that expects it to be printed on paper, because that would completely defeat the purpose of it being a web novel. If I ever got the opportunity to make this into a web novel, into an actual novel, I would it would basically be the fucking Rising of the Shield Hero, where the web version, the fucking novel, the comic version, and the anime are all different. They're all the same, but they differ in subtle ways. If I was going to adapt anything of this, that's how it would be. It would be adapted in such a way to take the consideration of the medium that it's going into, and telling whoever's doing the adapting, make sure that it works as well as it can in this medium. And if that means you have to make certain changes, then you can make those changes. Run them by me first so I understand why you're making those changes. but you're free to make those changes so long as it's actually necessary or actually does something to, exemplify it being in that medium and justify it.
Yeah, and I'm actually quite glad that you chose Shield because I think that is actually a perfect example where basically it's like the web novelization, the the light novel, the manga and the anime. It's like, yeah, they're all the same story, but like you said, it's like they differentiate themselves because of the actual mediums that they are in. It's like you can actually see with the certain changes that they need to be, but
Yep.
they are actual changes that are needed. Goblin, another work that has done the exact same thing, that has the exact same type of divides, is Goblin Slayer, but said I have no idea what happened with that one's anime. It's like that one decided to just make drastic changes in the anime that's like should be avoided.
Well, the thing is, also, it's like, why would I, if I have a web novel that's online for free to fucking read for free? Granted, I'm still in the process of editing it because I now have an editor, so I'm editing the chapters that are currently out before I write any more because they're in desperate need of editing. But why would I, if the fucking web novel is free, why would I expect someone to pay for a written version that's the same? Because not only is it have to be adapted for so it's a thing of fairness. It's like, yeah, if you're gonna buy the book, then yeah, why shouldn't you get something that's different from the version online? That way you have something more, right? So it's like, yeah, because you can sell the web novel still. Like I could potentially sell the web novel still as like a digital pack, so you have a digital version of it on there, at all times. So if the internet goes down and you want to read it first, you can still just scroll through it and you can read it on your own time. You could sell that on a CD. They already did that with the novel, with the book Agrippa, which was famous because it fucking encrypts itself after you read it once. But you can sell that kind of thing on a CD. You can sell it as a digital like file. Like websites do this all the time. So you can sell a web novel as a web novel, but if you're going to adapt a web novel into a novel, it should be adapted in such a way, again, to take advantage of the fact that it is a now physical novel and to compensate for the fact that it has lost certain advantages of being a web novel. Consider the constraints, and it should be adapted in such a way that it provides you something new for having gotten the novel version. I think that's the only way to make that fair, is for it to be at once essentially the same, but also subtly different in a way that rewards you for having bought the physical version. And I think that goes with the manga, if there was ever a manga of anything. Like if you adapt a light novel into a manga, I think that should carry as well. That there should be changes between the two, that way you're rewarded for having bought both of them, because they both contain information that may not necessarily be, they may still be two different continuities, but there's still more that you've actually bought. You've not just bought the thing regurgitated onto a different format for no reason.
Yes, it's like I agree with that 100%. It's also kind of the reason why I don't tend to like again, going back with the manga examples, like it's kind of the reason why I tend to not really like the animes that take the manga and adapt it into anime one for one. It's like they literally just took the panels and created in between scenes for that very specific reason.
Yeah, because it's like, why would I buy the other thing? It's the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's just my 10 cents. If I ever got to the point where this became successful enough to adapt it, or anything that I write becomes successful enough to adapt, that would be a demand I'd definitely have. It's like, look, we're rewriting this entire thing in such a way to take advantage of the fact that it's now in this new format, but also to compensate for the fact it's not in the old format.
Yeah.
So, all right. So we've bullshitted on this enough. To our one viewer, thank you for putting up with this. But we are going to head out.
I think it's technically been 3 because I've been watching. I've been looking. I had the live stream open on a separate tab, and I've been noticing it's been flickering between 1 and 3.
Ah, fair enough. Yeah, I don't know what's up with that. But
My guess is that it's like like I have two guesses on two reasons for that. It's like guess number one's like two people just keep on leaving every now and again in order to do something and come back, or two people will leave, then two new people come in, and then at a certain point, two other people leave.
Hmm. That's fair
That's
enough.
my guess.
Fair. Give me one moment. I want to look something up right before we leave.
Okay.
Uh, fuck. Let's see. I just want to learn how to do this first. How do they work? Let's see. Let me type this in. So. Ah, there's my shift key just popping out.
You really need to stop shifting so much.
Right. Okay, so let's do.
I've never seen such a shifty person.
Give me one moment. Oh, son of a gun. It would help if it would type in the text box. Whoops, that's misspelled. Let's see. So after you do that, what do you do? Okay, so it says you do it this way. Oh, oh shit, it is that simple.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, fuck it. We're going now. Bye.